Okay.
Good.
Now, it's yours.
All right. Okay. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I really do appreciate you inviting me here. Second of all, and the thought that keeps rolling around in my head, briefly panicking here because I'm realizing that this presentation is really designed for people who don't know very much about photography or photographs. And I'm a little nervous and bashful speaking to such an illustrious group because you all,
Ooh.
I'm quite confident, could give a way better presentation on this than I am. But we're going to go forward anyway, bravely here, and hope that maybe there'll be one tiny thing that you can take away with you that perhaps you didn't know before. Just to give you a little bit of background, I've been at the Atlanta History Center for 13 years now. Prior to that, I'm a recovering middle school teacher. I taught down in Henry County for a number of years and got on with the History Center back in 2008. My job now has kind of taken me a little bit away from the archival aspects of it because I now manage the History Center's oral history initiatives. That's kind of my primary job. And those of you who know me know that the best part about that job is our Veterans History Project. So I can't really give a program without getting a plug in for that. If you are a veteran or love a veteran or know a veteran, I hope that you'll reach out to me directly and let me tell you a little bit about the Veterans History Project. That's a topic for another presentation, but just know that that's there. I'm not one of those speakers that wants you to wait until I'm finished to ask questions. So please, if you want to pop up and say something, I hope that you'll feel free to do that. I'll try to pause after every couple of slides at least to give you plenty of opportunity to unmute yourself and feel free to ask questions. So what we're going to do tonight, let me go ahead and get my screen shared and make sure I'm doing this the right way. Okay, you should be able to see my screen, hopefully.
Yep.
See if we can get this going. All right, brilliant. Okay, so the title of the presentation is called A Picture's Worth 1,000 Words. And typically, if we were meeting in person, you would already have handouts. You would have all of the slides that I'm going to show tonight. You'd have an additional resources page that would have all of the websites and all of the things that we talk about tonight. And you would also have a little poem called The Strangers in the Box. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to read that poem to you, but it does kind of have a bearing on some of the things that we'll talk about. So what we're going to do tonight is a couple of things. First of all, kind of keep this fella in mind because we're going to talk about him later. Does he look familiar to any of you? No? Okay, we'll talk about him in just a little bit. What we're going to do tonight is a few things. I'd like to talk a little bit about collecting photographs. Now, those of you that are taking them madly, I realize the audience that I'm speaking to now, you may not need any advice on collecting, but this is sort of for those of us who have a genealogy focus. I will talk a little bit about how to get family photographs, a little bit about how to identify them, and only just a little tiny bit about organizing them. What you can do to organize your collection, what you can do to preserve your collection, because that's so important. We'll talk a little bit about video, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about sharing, how you can kind of share your collection. So I know that's a tall order. Hylas, when did you want me to stop? How long do I have? You're not muted. You're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. As long as you need to talk. An
Oh,
hour, we're
no,
good.
Yeah, I doubt it'll be that. And I want to make sure that I leave some time for questions as well. So that's what we're going to try to do tonight. So to begin with, I wanted to talk just a little bit about collecting in case you are like me and are always looking for more information about your ancestors. Again, genealogy is kind of a big part of what I do. And so that's kind of my focus, tends to be my focus. There's always a family member who's got some photographs that you might maybe not have. So I did want to talk just a little bit about collecting photographs from family members. And to illustrate, this is a picture out of a scrapbook that my mother's cousin put together. None of the photographs in her scrapbook were originals, fortunately, because she was smart enough to know that you don't put original photos in a scrapbook. That's not a good way to preserve them. So these were all reproductions of photos, or they were just Xerox copies that she had pasted into the scrapbook. And what I love about this is for each one of the photographs in the scrapbook, she would write what her memories were. She's one of the youngest of my mother's cousins, and so she kind of had a little bit more time maybe with the grandparents. She spent a little more time with them maybe than some of the other cousins did. And so you've got this wonderful image of my grandmother's brother, who died at the age of 3, and this little story that she wrote about how on his deathbed, the family legend has it that he told his mother and father that he could see the angels around his bed. Wonderful little stories about each of these family members. So I asked her if it would be okay, fully expecting her to tell me no. I asked her if it would be okay because I didn't come with any equipment with me, and this was long before the days of cell phones. I asked her if she would mind if I took this scrapbook down to the local Kinko's and made some copies just of the images that kind of pertain to my branch of the family. She very graciously agreed to do that. So I took this scrapbook down to Kinko's and I Xeroxed it. And that's where this page came from. This is a picture. So this is a Xerox copy of a Xerox copy of maybe an original, maybe not. I mean, this is several generations removed. You can certainly take a digital camera and a tripod, and I wish that I had done that during that visit because she has since passed away. But a digital camera and a tripod will certainly do if you're wanting to capture some of the photos that your ancestors have. That's the best way probably to do it, because then you don't have to worry about removing the photographs or the scrapbook from their collection. People can be very sensitive about that, and rightly so. You certainly don't want to let those kinds of things get far away from your house. A portable flatbed scanner is also a great idea. But a lot of genealogists want to do the handheld scanners, and I always have to tell them you don't want to do that with photographs. Anything that physically runs across the image is not a good idea, because as you all know, that can damage the emulsion. That can be very bad for the photographs. So you do want to try to stick with a flatbed scanner if you can. But in this case, because they weren't originals, she was willing to let me take the scrapbook down to Kinko's. And so I went ahead, after I had taken this image, I went ahead and cropped this particular image out. This is my great-grandmother when she was a very young woman. And I wanted to show you what this looks like, just popped in regular image editing software. In this case, I think it was Adobe Elements that I had, a cheap version of Adobe that I put together. And this is what it looks like when it's blown up. And you know, that's not too bad for being a Xerox copy of a Xerox copy. It turned out fairly decent. And as you all know, there's all kinds of things that you can do to manipulate images to make them look a little bit better and to clean them up. So you can certainly collect photographs from your family members, and that's always a great thing to do, to ask your family if anybody has photos that they might maybe be willing to share. So this was a great image of my great-grandmother that I did not have until I made that visit to my cousin, or to my mother's cousin. So that's one thing that you can do. You can certainly collect images from newspapers as well. So this is an image that I discovered in a subject file at the Atlanta History Center. It's my great uncle. I had no idea that my great uncle had any connection whatsoever with Atlanta. And it turns out the Atlanta History Center has a subject file on him. He taught ROTC at Georgia Tech, and he was a corregidor survivor. And so the AJC got wind of that story and went down and photographed him and wrote a two-page spread all about him when he was teaching ROTC at Georgia Tech. As you can see, obviously, this is a newspaper image, so it's not the best of images, but if it's the only image that you've got of your ancestor or something important that you'd like to keep, it's certainly a way to do that. And there's a couple of suggestions here of places that you can go online to gather photographs that you might maybe be interested in. Google is a wonderful thing. The newspaper sites that I use most often are newspapers.com and Genealogy Bank. But there's other databases out there. And the Georgia Newspaper Project is a great collection of digitized newspapers throughout the state of Georgia. If they're digitized, sometimes those images can be a lot better. This particular image I just took from the actual newspaper clipping that was in that subject file. And there are all kinds of great images that are out there on the web. You'd be surprised, I think. I've just Googled an ancestor's name and have come across images sometimes. This particular image here was just a random one that I selected from the Georgia Virtual Vault, which was an initiative by the Georgia Archives a number of years ago to collect photographs from all of the different counties in Georgia. And so these are user submitted images. Sometimes there's not a whole lot of metadata that comes along with it. But this particular image is a photograph that someone submitted from Clayton County. So there's an awful lot of photographs out there on the web that could be helpful for you to use. Let me see if I can move that toolbar out of the way. Other places to find photographs are state and local historical societies, colleges and universities. Even some local libraries will have real nice local research rooms. The Switzer Library up here in Cobb County has those of you who know the Switzer Library has a fantastic Georgia genealogy room. So some local libraries can have some pretty good information. Good photographs there as well. So you can collect from family, you can collect from the web, you can collect from newspapers. When you've got these photographs, then your next step is kind of to identify them. And so we're going to talk just a little bit about identifying them. And again, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. I feel like all of you know so much more than I do about this, but I wanted to talk just a little bit about the difficulties that are inherent in having photos in your collection that you have no idea who that person is. And I'm the one. Usually, I would take a show of hands if we were meeting in person. Usually there's one person in every family who kind of tends to be the one that everybody sends their stuff to. So I am the one. I've got literally a room full of Hollinger boxes of manuscript and photo collections that have been handed down to me from various and assorted family members, mostly from my parents and my grandparents. And in many cases, I don't have a clue who these folks are. This little image here, I absolutely adore. I know that it's my grandfather's family. This is the grandfather who was born in New York, Arthur Heft Bauer, and lived all of his life in California as Jackson Hardy. Why? No idea. Around Halloween time, we like to watch the movie Arsenic and Old Lace. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. There's a great quote in that movie where Cary Grant says to his bride, insanity runs in my family. In fact, it practically gallops. That is something that has gone on in my family. So I don't know who these people are. And my grandfather died the year before I was born, and my dad never talked much about his family. So trying to identify these images has been a little problematic. I keep hoping that someday I will run across a cousin somewhere who knows who this is. Based on some things that we're going to talk about as we go through this presentation, I think this might maybe be my grandfather when he was a child, but I'm not sure. So what are some things that we can do to identify photos in our collection that we might maybe not have more details for? And there's a few things, and some of these slides I'm going to go through fairly quickly because, again, I feel like you all know way more about this than I do. The type of photograph can certainly give you some clues, even if it's nothing more than helping you narrow down the time frame in which the photograph might maybe have been taken. So this is an example of a daguerreotype. Most of you know what a daguerreotype is. There's information on the slide here about that. And I meant to say when we started the presentation, I am happy to send that resources guide and all of these slides as a PDF to anybody who wants it. I can certainly send it to Hylos, and then he can pass all that out to all of you, or you can contact me directly, feel free, but I'm happy to share all this. So please don't feel like you need to take notes or write anything down while we're talking. So if you've got a daguerreotype in your collection, you are a lucky duck. These are wonderful, wonderful images, and I always want to cry a little bit when I go to flea markets and see them for sale. You know, unidentified photos, ancestors for sale, that always hurts. But daguerreotypes are a wonderful, the earliest form of photography. Popular well into the 1860s, although they, again, are the earliest form of photography. And there's a little information on this slide about how they're created. Another popular type of photograph is the ambrotype. This is a little bit later, 1850s to 1890s, and certainly those date ranges, you can find them a little before and a little after that. The reason why this one looks a little wonky is the paper that's put behind this ambrotype is white on one side and black on the other side. So this was a transparent negative that is placed typically in a frame with glass over it, and so the backing behind it is what gives it its is what enables you to see the image. So in this particular case, we put that paper behind it just to sort of illustrate that if you put white paper behind it, you're going to get kind of a negative image. If you put dark paper behind it, then you can see the details of the photograph coming through. Tintypes, again, 1850s to 1930s. This was popular kind of well into the 20th century. Tintypes are easily recognizable because they're done not on tin, but they're done on metal. It was a thin sheet, a very thin sheet of iron that was coated with a black varnish, and then the photograph was created that way. Sometimes that you'll find them in cases, but more often than not, they're put in little sleeves like this. And this is one from our collection. So tintypes, if you've got a tintype in your collection, you know that it was probably created sometime during that time frame. And then probably the most popular type of photograph, and most of us have at least one of these in our collection, would be albumin prints. Also known as cabinet cards, cartes de visite. They're, depending on the size, they go by different names. Albumin prints refer to the type of photographic method used. So this was a thin sheet of paper that was immersed in an egg and salt wash, and then it was brushed with chemicals and exposed to light. They adhere to a stiff backing. In all of the thousands and thousands of photographs, these cased images that we have at the History Center, we've only found one where the image itself is coming away from the backing. I don't know what kind of adhesive they used in that time period, but man, it was really good, because typically they do not come off that backing. Statistics tend to show that about 80% of all 19th century photography were albumin prints. Most of us think of them kind of as this sepia tone, like this beautiful gentleman that we have sitting here, that are sort of in the different tonal browns. They're all kind of browns and yellows. But that really is a function of how that photograph was preserved, how or whether that photograph was ever preserved. And I wanted to show you just a couple of examples. This image here, we always get a kick out of. Now it's in a little plastic sleeve for preservation purposes. We have no idea what this photo is about, but it always kind of cracks us up. We call it Boy with Squirrel. I don't think it's a pet because he's gripping it pretty tightly around the neck. We're not sure if it was a live squirrel or a dead squirrel, but for whatever reason, this fellow decided he was going to have his photograph taken with this squirrel. And again, this is typically what you think of when you think of albumin prints or cabinet cards, is this sort of washed out sepia tone. But this image right here is probably far more what it looked like after it was created. So properly preserved, you get these beautiful, rich tones that are definitely not the kind of washed out browns and yellows that we tend to think of. So I love this image of this guy. So wide extremes between the way these two particular photographs were preserved. So knowing a little bit about the kind of photograph can help you narrow down when it might maybe have been taken, and that might maybe help you know a little bit about who is in the photograph and why it was taken. But there's other ways as well. And one of the best ways is the photographer. If you've got a photograph that shows, and sorry, I've got and I see there's something in the chat too. So let me check out the chat real quick. Oh, yes, absolutely. Oh, thank you, Hylos. You already did that. And I'm going to put my phone number in there as well. All righty. If you're lucky enough to have a photograph that has the name of the photographer down here at the bottom, you are in good shape, because There are lots of ways to do that. City directories are becoming more and more available online. Digital versions of city directories are becoming more widely available. Local historical societies, local libraries will frequently have city directories. And by going to the city directory and looking up that photographer's name, I can tend to get an idea of where and when that photographer did business. So this is an image of my grandmother's sister that was taken in Buenos Aires. And if I went to Buenos Aires City Directory, I could get a little more information about where that might maybe, what businesses might maybe have been located around that, that photographer. So knowing the photographer's name can certainly help you as well. But probably the best clues that most of us tend to use when we're trying to identify photograph is clues that are available in the photograph itself. So things like the age and the gender of the people in it, clothing and hairstyles, location, where the photograph was taken, if you can tell that, transportation, architecture, all of these things can be helpful. So taking a look at this one, and feel free to unmute yourself if you want to. Would any of you want to hazard a guess as to when this photograph might maybe have been taken? What clues are there that would tell you?
Well, if somebody knows what year that car was made.
Absolutely.
And
Even if you didn't.
I'm going to guess 1930s based on the hat.
That's a very good guess. And so clothing too, the hat is a dead giveaway. The car is a dead giveaway. Now you don't have a lot of the car, but just looking at it, you know that we're probably talking 1920s, 1930s. The transportation, so in other words, cars in the photograph can be a little bit problematic because you don't know whether this is a new car or whether this is an old car. And so that's why you want to use all of the possible clues in there. So definitely the hat, definitely the mink that she has on here, the purse, her dress. Anything else about the clothing in this photograph that strikes you? How about the young man?
Well, she's got a pocketbook
She
or a
does.
purse. That purse looks like a classic 30s, 40s type purse. I don't know.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah, definitely clothing. How about the boy? What is he wearing?
Almost looks like a uniform of some kind, but
It does look like a uniform, doesn't it? So that would certainly be a clue. Now, oh, go ahead.
just a square bottom tie. Of course, the ties keep going, they go in cycles, so I don't know when this one was.
They do. Are any of you familiar with the book Dressed for the Photographer? Okay. It could be your new best friend if you're trying to identify photographs based on the clues in the photos. It's listed in the resources that I'm going to send you at the end of the presentation here. And we do have a copy of it at the History Center if you wanted to come in and take a look. It's a wonderful book because she breaks it down literally by decade. From the 1830s when daguerreotypes first came into being, you know, right through, I would say probably middle to late 20th century. And she breaks it down by decade and talks about women's clothing, men's clothing, and children's clothing. So, you know, with pictures and images of what collars look like, ties. I'm so glad you picked out the tie because that's a dead giveaway. The person who picked out the purse, you know, all of those things are things that you could look up in this wonderful book that might help you to kind of narrow down the time period. Now, as luck would have it, I know who these folks are. This is my grandmother, my dad's adopted mother, and then it's my dad. And my dad was born in 1920. Based on kind of how he looks in the photo, I'm thinking maybe he was 10, somewhere maybe between 9 and 11, I'm thinking. So I think you're absolutely right. Late 20s, maybe very early 30s for this photograph. So those are all things that you're going to do when you're trying to identify photos in your collection. You also want to think about what you already know. So if you find this photograph in a stack of other photographs, that can be a clue in and of itself. There may be other photographs in the collection, in your collection, that will help to shed light on that one. And that's why I always kind of recommend that you go through your photographs periodically from the start. even if you've got them all organized and perfectly put away in binders or boxes or however you've stored your photos, the more research that you do about your family, the more you're going to learn about your family. And frequently a clue that you missed in an early photograph will all of a sudden make sense the more you know. Okay, so do make sure you go through them every so often. When you're organizing your photos, it's the best if you can not to remove them from their original containers, from their scrapbooks or their albums, unless you have to preserve them. But in any case, try not to do that until you've finished going through the whole collection at least once, so that you've got an idea of what you have. Context can be extremely important when you're processing a photo collection. And then if you do have to remove photos from an album, think about scanning or taking a digital photograph of the album pages before you remove them, because again, sometimes there's no rhyme or reason, but usually, typically, photos were put in an album or in a scrapbook in an order that made sense to the person who was doing it to begin with. Now, that does not apply if you're my mother. With my mother, you've got, cabinet cards from the 1890s right next to a 1970s crappy Polaroid. There's no rhyme or reason. If she found a spot in a photograph, she'd slap it in there. But typically when folks are putting these things together, they're kind of putting them together in some kind of an order. And then consult with other family members. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can kind of share some of your photos to make that a little bit easier. But getting the take of other family members can be really helpful in that regard. And comparing with similar photographs online. So if I was curious about the year, make, and model of this car right here, I might maybe want to go online and look at, Fords or Studebakers or whatever, and see if I can find some images online that would be similar to that car, so that might maybe help me date it as well. So here's another photograph that was taken at the same time. So what other clues in this photograph might be helpful?
Definitely
ideas?
the name of the academy in the background.
Yes, yes, very much so. Now, this is a crummy, it was a crummy old negative, and I scanned it, did the best I could with it, but I was not going to get it a whole lot clearer than this. Fortunately, my dad talked very briefly when I was much younger that he had gone to a place called Page Military Academy. So that one was pretty easy to figure out because I can see the P and the A and that sign behind it. I knew that he lived in Arizona, and so I was thinking Page, Arizona. Well, it turns out that this particular academy was actually in the Los Angeles area. And there, when I went online and did a Google, again, Google is your friend, went online and did a Google search for Page Military Academy, there's a bazillion photographs that people have put up online of class photos, of, marching drills on the field, of what the school buildings look like. So, once you hit pay dirt and kind of have an idea of what you're looking at, there can be a lot of additional information out there on the web that can be helpful to you. So yeah, very good. And that's my grandfather, the one who changed his name. Still trying to piece together his life, but that's an image of him with my dad. So really fun to have. Wanted to talk for just a few minutes about organization, and I always have to stick a Kathy cartoon in here because she's my alter ego. She dreams of lying on a secluded beach with a book and all the magazines and newspapers she hasn't had time to read. Book, magazines, newspapers, boxes of photos, correspondence, recipes, scrapbooks, foreign language tapes. Even my fantasy world has run out of storage space. So if you're like me, you might kind of feel like her. So I'm hoping that maybe we can come up with a few tips here that might help you manage this just a little bit. And number one, you don't have to save everything. So I love the comments before we started this recording about the fact that someone's wife, I don't remember who it was now, but your wife said this, no, there's no point in keeping photographs that don't have people in them. That's a personal decision. There may be landscape photos that you do want to keep, but definitely you don't have to keep everything. You want to think about these things. You want to think about the photograph's age, its condition, and its rarity, first and foremost. Even if I had kind of a blurry daguerreotype, I probably wouldn't trash it. If it's the only one you've got, if it's a very old photograph, if it's in halfway decent condition, and it's the only one of its kind, you may want to go ahead and keep it, even if it doesn't meet maybe stricter criteria for photographs that would have been created later on. But then you also want to be thinking about your own personal priorities. If it has people in it, probably, definitely. But if it's got objects in it that are important to you, some of us that tend to do a lot of genealogy research also kind of like to do historic home and neighborhood research. And I'm always fascinated when I can find photographs of the homes that my ancestors lived in. So even if there's no people in it, that's something that I might maybe want to keep. But truly, how many blurry vacation shots of Niagara Falls do you really need? So it's okay. I'm giving you my blessing as an archivist. It is okay to get rid of photographs. Now, it may hurt you to put them in the trash, and maybe you don't want to put them in the trash. You can certainly offer them to other family members. You can certainly think about offering them to local historical societies. If you know geographically where those photos were taken, they might be very grateful to get those kinds of things. But it is okay to weed your collection and make sure that you're only keeping the photographs that are particularly important to you. Everybody always asks in presentations like this, should I digitize everything I have? Should I keep my prints? Should I do both? What should I do? I have a colleague who was actually a trained archivist who digitized all of her photographs and then threw all of them away. I don't think I could do that, but she did that. That worked for her. I tend to kind of do both. So let me explain that just a little bit. I don't digitize everything I've got. I'm still working through my photographs. Full disclosure here, this presentation is probably more for me than anybody else because I've got an awful lot of organizing still to do. I've managed to organize all of the manuscript materials that my family papers have turned into be, but I'm still working on the photo end of it. I managed to wrestle 27 slide trays to the ground and finish that project. So I'm very proud of myself for that one. Now I'm kind of starting on the probably 50 small boxes that I have of photographs and negatives. So that's going to be a much longer project. So I haven't quite done that yet, but I'm working on it. So when you think about digitizing your collection, whatever part of your collection you want to digitize, whether you want to digitize the whole thing or whether you want to be selective and just take photographs that you feel have the most value to your family or to you, you do want to make sure that you're backing up those files regularly and in multiple locations. And you all, I'm sure, know you want to be doing this on external hard drives. You do not want to be doing this on CDs or USB drives because neither of those are stable for long-term storage. They are okay for getting things from one computer to another or for sharing with family members. But if you've got things on CDs, if you've got things on USB drives, you do want to make sure that you're saving those in more dependable spots. One of the best pieces of advice I got from attending another genealogy program was someone who said they have 2 external hard drives. They keep one at home and they keep one in their office. And then they swap them. So they'll bring the one home from the office, back up everything on their computer on it, and then swap it back out that way. So they've got 2 separate versions of their materials stored in 2 separate geographic locations. If you're not working, then maybe a safe deposit box would be a place to think of. Or maybe you want to store an external hard drive with a family member, a cousin, or a child. But be thinking about that. You do want to have backups in 2 separate geographic locations. And we'll talk a little bit more about cloud storage as we go further, but that's certainly something that you want to be thinking about too. A lot of my folks that don't know much about photographs tend to balk at this, to use TIFFs for your masters, but that's kind of an archival practice. It's something that you can think about. Maybe it makes sense for you, maybe it doesn't. At the History Center, we do use the TIFF format for our archival master. So of the probably millions of photographs that we have in the collection, we do have 2 versions of each and every one of them. We've got the archival master, which is a TIFF, and then we have what we call the access copy or the digital surrogate, which is a JPEG. So that's a smaller file that's easier for us to share online. But for our patrons who want to purchase photographs, we give them that TIFF, that original high resolution archival master. We give them a copy of that. So that's something to think about. When you're working with your digital collections, you do want to think file names all the way through. So file names are can always be kind of problematic. It's much better now. Those of you who remember the days when if you had a PC or a Windows machine, you were very limited in the number of characters you could use for a file name. Mac users could have much longer file names. Thankfully, those days are over to a certain extent. You can have a much longer file name on a PC, but you do want to make your file names as descriptive as you can so that you can let your computer do some of the work when you're searching for photographs on your hard drive. It also helps for you in organization if you're being very thoughtful about how you use your file names. You may want to use surnames, you may want to use locations, you may want to use dates, however you want to label and organize your photographs. You just want to make sure you're thinking that all the way through, because there's nothing worse than going through 27 slide trays and then realizing that maybe you should have named those files a little bit differently. I think I'm okay, but when I got to about tray number 13, I realized that there were probably other things that I could have done. So think it all the way through before you get started in a big project like that. When you think about data migration, you want to be aware of that. And when I say data migration, I'm talking about things like obsolete file types, but also obsolete storage receptacles. So, you know, those of us over a certain age, we remember very well the days of floppy disks. I'm not sure you can find a computer that has a floppy disk. It's getting difficult now to find computers that have CD drives or DVD drives or DVD writers or CD writers on them. So obviously, storage formats are going to change. File types are going to change a little bit. And I only know enough about that to make me dangerous, but I can tell you that in working with all the video files that I work with, there are different formats that have kind of gone in and out of popularity over time. You know, MPEGs and H.264s and, you know, those kinds of things. So be thinking about that, about how you're going to make sure that if you do have digital files, that they are usable for the long term. So unfortunately, this is not a project that you're going to be able to finish and then walk away from and forget. You're going to have to kind of monitor your digital files over time periodically to make sure that you're prepared for that. Some folks have suggested checking your files once a year. Obviously running virus checks regularly to make sure that you don't have any corruption going on in your files. And I thought this was kind of a coworker of mine suggested this. In fact, she's our visual arts archivist. She suggested creating new copies every 5 years or so to make sure that your file type is up to date and that you haven't lost anything there. So those are all kinds of things to be thinking about as you think about digitizing your photo collections, whether or not you want to do that. And then I thought this is again from our visual arts archivist. She strongly suggests keeping a summary document with your digital files. And the summary document should probably also have something about how you created your file structure. So I've been trying to do that. I've been trying with, particularly with the negatives, because those are harder to see. I've been trying to create an Excel spreadsheet that talks a little bit about them. I've realized that I'm the last one. My brother, I guess my brother and I are the last two who really kind of know anything about some of the negatives that I have in my collection, some of the family photographs and negatives. And so in this spreadsheet, I've tried to kind of make a notes field where I can attach as much metadata as I possibly can to the image so that later on, when this collection gets handed down to my kids, they'll know at least as much as I know about these photos. They may not know everything, but they'll at least know as much as I do. So keeping a document with your digital files that helps to explain some of those things can be really helpful, whether it's a Word document, whether you want to use an Access database or an Excel spreadsheet, or however you want to do that. Sometimes keeping some kind of a document with it can be helpful. Wanted to talk just a minute about slides. So these two images, this is my amazing mother. Is she not the height of cool? This cigarette in her hand and the sunglasses. I love this. This is my mom and my two older brothers at Disneyland. in probably 1962, 63, roughly. This is one version of that slide, and this is another version of that slide. So let me go back to the first one. So this is version number 1, and this is version number 2. One of those versions, and to be honest, I've lost track, I don't remember now, but one of these versions I had digitized by Colorchrome, who is the company that History Center uses for most of our exhibition projects. So for example, you know, banners, window clings, you know, oversized exhibit text panels, they're the ones that we go to reproduce those things. And I asked them to do a couple of my slides. Now, they charged like $4 a slide to do this. So it was expensive and certainly not something that I can do with all 27 trays, but was something that I was thinking about doing for a select number of the most important slides in my collection. And then the other version is one that I just did with my little Epson scanner, my little $200 Epson slide scanner. And I don't know about y'all, but you know, I can't really tell much of a difference. There's a little bit of color correction, but you know, the one that I scanned myself, I didn't color correct. I just kind of scanned it and threw it up there. So I think it's safe to say that you can get some pretty good results doing this stuff yourself. You don't necessarily have to go to a professional to get slides and photographs digitized. This is something that you can easily do on your own. So just kind of throwing that out there. Any questions up to this point? I have totally lost my bar. Nope, no more in the chat. I guess we're good. Any questions? Okay. Couple of words about organizing. You want to think about your goals when you're organizing your photographs or your videos or whatever, or your manuscript collection, whatever you're doing. You want to think about your goals, and probably the two most important goals you're going to have is to make them accessible so you can find them, you put your hands on them when you need them, and you're safeguarding them. So those are the first two things that you're going to be thinking about. You want to think about who the photographs belonged to or who the video belonged to, because that can help you create some good metadata and help you put some context behind the things that you have in the collection. Again, you want to think about the entire collection. So go through all of it first before you start foldering and getting a little bit more detailed in your organization. So look through everything first to kind of get a good grip on what you have. You do want to identify as many of your photographs as you can, even if it's just a geographic area or a subject or a time period. You're probably never going to get the people identified in every single photograph, but you do want to try to attach as much metadata to your photos as you can so that you can search for them later on. Are any of you familiar with Memory Web?
No, I'm
No?
not.
Okay. I'm still kind of trying to make friends with it. Are any of you familiar with Maureen Taylor, the photo detective? Okay, she's somebody that you may want to get familiar with. She's pretty amazing, and we'll talk a little bit more about her in just a few minutes. But Memory Web is a web-based platform. It's a subscription service, but it's a web-based platform for creating metadata, particularly for family historians and for genealogists. I'm still kind of trying to make friends with it. But it is really a pretty cool resource. You know, like I said, I haven't quite figured everything out, and I don't remember now whether I'm signed in. So good, yay! It is a pretty cool tool, not only for keeping your stuff, and you can see I've only put very few photographs in here, but for sharing. So you can sync if you put a lot of photographs on Family Search, if you've got a lot of photographs on Facebook, got a lot of photographs in Dropbox or Google Drive or many other platforms, you can sync those photographs with Memory Web to help you kind of keep track of things. So let me just kind of show you what this looks like, if I can get it to work here. So for example, here's a photograph, and let's see if I can move this out of the way. There's all kinds of, you can tag these, you can attach all kinds of additional metadata. Let me see what you know, I can tag people here. I can add the location where this photograph was taken. I can put dates. I can put it in an album. I can do the back and the front of the photograph. So this is a way for you to kind of marry up captions that might maybe be written on the back of photographs. I can put keywords in here. It's a really nice, powerful program. The problem that I've had with it so far, and I'm sure that it's solvable, I haven't quite figured out how to sort of standardize things so that I can apply the same tags to multiple photographs that were taken at the same time. But I did want to kind of mention it. It is subscription based, but it's something that I'm having a little bit of fun with, and hoping that maybe I can play around with this a little bit more. I think it can be a really useful tool for sharing, particularly for sharing family history photographs with family members, because there's so much metadata that you can attach to each one of these. And again, it's sort of designed for family historians. So that's something kind of to think about, is memory web. Might maybe be helpful to you. Few words about preservation and handling. Proper storage of your photographs and anything that you have really is crucial. The first thing that I typically do when I'm going through a collection is remove anything that was attached to it over the years. Paper clips, Post-it notes, rubber bands, all that stuff is just so bad. Some of you may have seen things in your collections too. I've got photographs that were attached to a piece of paper with a straight pin. You know, in the 19th century, I guess they didn't use paper clips a whole lot, or at least at some parts of that century. And so I've seen straight pins, I've seen, you know, brad fast, I've seen all kinds of wonky things. You want to get that stuff off your photos as best as you can. Unscented and uncoated dental floss works really well to gently remove photographs that have been glued in. And again, you want to be careful about removing them. You want to make sure you're not doing more damage to the photo than you would if you'd left it there. But if you want to remove them or have to remove them, dental floss can be helpful. Magnetic pages. Do you all know what I mean by magnetic? I wish I had a picture.
Sadly, yes.
Sorry?
Sadly, yes.
Yes. Okay. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those of you who might maybe not be familiar with that term, those are those gosh awful pages that photo albums used to come with that had the sticky stuff on one side of the page and then a plastic overlay. So you stick the photograph on the sticky stuff and then you put this plastic overlay across the front. Those are just death to your photographs. I've got pages of those that I can't remove the photographs no matter what. So I have resorted to, you know, ripping off that plastic sheet, which is easy to get off, and then just scanning them and digitizing them that way, because I know eventually those photos are going to be gone and there's really no way to remove them from those pages. So yeah, those are problematic. The other ones that I hate are the old black felt. You guys know what I mean? Those old photograph albums that look like black felt. My mother would have like a white marker and she'd use the white marker to write info about the, yeah, those are kind of a mess too. Sometimes you can't get those out. And if you can't get those out, it's okay. You can use archival safe tissue paper to overlay those pages to keep the photos from touching each other. So you can put a piece of archival safe tissue paper in between the pages to keep the photos from hitting each other and leave them where they are. Sometimes it's better to leave them than it is to try to remove them if removing them will do more damage. Different formats may need to be stored in different containers. Typically, we store our negatives separately from our photographs. Large photographs may need to be stored separately because you always want to make sure that whatever container you're storing it in fits the image. You really don't want to roll up or fold photographs for obvious reasons. We use polyethylene or polypropylene sleeves for negatives and slides in many cases, but we do that mostly because we have lots of sticky fingers coming in to look at them, right? So to make these available for patrons and to protect the photographs, we like to put them in these sleeves to keep patrons from actually touching them. We do give them gloves, nitrile gloves, if they have to handle them, but we try to keep them in those sleeves to prevent that. That may be problematic for your personal collection. You may not have the funds to do that. Putting them in sleeves also, you know, doubles the bulk, and so that can be a problem too. So you don't have to, but that's something that you can consider. Cased images should be housed in separate envelopes, mostly just because they're big and bulky and they can, you know, brush up against other photographs and create problems that way. So we usually store them in separate folders, and I'll talk about where you can get those here in just a minute. You do want to make sure that your photos comfortably fit the container that you use, whatever container that might be. Always support photographs fully and gently. Use cotton or nitrile gloves if there's no margin on them. You always want to store them in archival safe containers in areas away from light, heat, and humidity. You always want to record whatever metadata you have and keep it with the photo as best as you can. Sometimes it's easy to just make a Xerox copy of the photo and use that to write down who it is, especially group photos. You can, you know, draw arrows and write down on the copy who's in that photograph. Always use copies when you're scrapbooking or putting things up on the wall. If you take a high-res digital scan or a high-res digital photograph of your old photos and have that printed on photographic paper, it's almost impossible to tell that it's not the original. And that way you can keep the original away from light and heat and humidity. Obviously, don't put food or drink anywhere around. You know, we say that and we all think we'll be careful, but just don't do it. Don't use Post-it notes or tape or glue or any kind of adhesive on your photos, and never write on them. And just a real quick story, because I know I'm running low on time. That fella there at the beginning, this is not actually a photograph. This is actually a painting. I'm lucky enough to actually have an ancestor who painted tiny little likenesses. If you're a Jane Austen fan, you know, you hear the term, oh, that's a likeness of Mr. Darcy. I've got these beautiful tiny little paintings of my ancestors. I've got 4 or 5 of them. They're gorgeous. I wasn't sure who they were. I asked my mother and my aunt to come over and help me identify. I gave them Post-it notes to put on the back temporarily until I could, you know, copy that information somewhere else. Well, my aunt kind of got away from the Post-it notes and from the pencils that I had out, and she picked up a red marker and wrote my ancestor's name on the back of this photograph or this painting. So if you hold this painting up to the light now, you can see that red marker on it's tragic. Not only that, this is not my ancestor. This is Henry Clay. I found that out later. My ancestor, who was the painter, made this little image. I don't know if we're related to him. I haven't figured that out yet, but that's actually Henry Clay. That is not my great-great-grandfather. So don't write on your photos. If you can, avoid storing them on wooden shelving or in wooden trunks, because wood gives off gases that can interact negatively with photographic materials. And then try not to store your photos with other things. Try to keep just your photos with your photos, and definitely don't store them with newspapers. Newspapers are horribly acidic, and most paper is going to be acidic too. So you don't want that near your photos. Just a quick blurb about working with videos, and I'm not going to play this clip, but that is my mother on her tricycle at Pearl Harbor in about 1932. I am so lucky to have some amazing video. It's film. It was 8mm film that I had digitized. A lot of analog formats out there for film, VHS, mini DV, they're all unstable. If you have any of these old formats in your collection, they're going to go eventually. It's just a matter of time. So you do want to prioritize seeing about getting those digitized. Otherwise, you're going to lose them. Few ways of doing that. There are things you can hook up to your computer and play. If you still have the camcorder that you recorded them on, or if you've got a VHS player, you can hook it up to your computer and digitize. Do your research. There's a lot of different methods out there to do. Some of them work better than others. There's all kinds of issues when you do that with codecs, and that's not a conversation really for this presentation, but just know that digitizing a file doesn't necessarily mean that any device is going to be able to play it. Just want you to kind of have that in the back of your mind. But there are ways to convert codecs into playable formats. So just kind of keep all that in your mind. There's a few low-tech ways to digitize your video. You can actually, if you have a player that will play it, you can play it and set up your own phone or digital camera and record it. If you've got it focused tightly, that can work too. Or you can do what I did and just hand over a couple of your paychecks to a professional. I have to tell you, that film that I just showed you a screenshot from, it's amazing. I've got additional film canisters that I found that have my great grandparents walking out of a door and waving to the camera. Don't ask me how I got lucky enough to get this stuff, but I do. And I don't mind a bit paying somebody to digitize that properly. And they have done a beautiful job of that. I will show you one thing real quickly. Well, no, I won't show you. I'll just tell you. That film that I just mentioned of Pearl Harbor, my brother had that digitized on VHS tape years ago. And then he put the VHS tapes in the player and stuck an audio cassette on the coffee table and had my mom talk about the films, because obviously they're silent. So I had this collection of VHS tapes and audio cassette tapes. I took the whole mess to my vendor that I love more than life itself, and they married the two together into a single digital file. So I have these 1930s films and my mother telling you, this is our quarters at Fort Kamehameha, and this is, my father, this is the military base. This is where we were doing the hula. I mean, it's amazing. So yeah, there's professionals out there that can do that for you. It's not cheap, but in my book, it's worth every penny to have that material for my kids and my grandkids and those that will come after. Keep the devil out of the details. Don't get so wrapped up in this. Don't get overwhelmed. It's tough when you look at a ginormous box full of photographs. You just need to take a little piece of it at a time, carve out an hour a week and just sit down with it for a little bit. But get it done. The sooner you get it done, the better. Where to go for help? Couple of choices here. Certainly contact me. I'm happy to point you in the right direction. The Georgia Archives has a beautiful section on caring for your records, and there is info in there about photographs and books and all kinds of good stuff. The American Institute for Conservation equally has wonderful resources for preserving things, including three-dimensional artifacts, quilts, textiles, things like that. So there are folks out there that can help you with this if you get overwhelmed. When it comes to sharing, there's so many ways to do that. YouTube, Facebook, a blog. Think about cloud storage when you think about sharing your photographs, but also preserving your photos. Just be aware that whatever you put online, it's going to be difficult to retain intellectual control over that. Once you put a photo online with Ancestry or Family Search or Facebook, that photo or that video, you lose a little bit of control over it. So be selective about what you put out there. Just be aware of that. And then you can do so many great things. This is a great time to talk about this because Christmas is coming up. I took a bunch of photographs and my mother's handwritten recipes and created a recipe book for my kids that I gave them for Christmas a few years ago. That went over like wildfire. They were so thrilled to have that with stories about the family recipes. There's so much that you can do with your photos. This is a blog that I keep for my kids so that they kind of know a little bit about some of the genealogy discoveries that I have. So that can be a fun way to do it too. And finally, because I know I'm out of time, don't get overwhelmed. Organizing and preserving your collections, your photo collections, your manuscript, all of that stuff really is kind of like eating an elephant. But how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So just do it. And particularly for those of us that are getting on a little bit in years, again, you may find that you're the last person around who knows something about the people in your photos, who knows something about the events in those photographs. Make sure that you're organizing these things and preserving them so that you can hand them down to those that come after you. And that's all I've got.
Well, Sue, thank you. Anybody got any questions? Wow, we got,
Yeah, I do have one quick question. What is your thought, or what is the general archivist's thought on restoring the scanned images? You know, if you have a crease or something like that.
So that's a good question. Typically, the first question to ask yourself is you don't want to risk damaging further, because we've got literally hundreds of thousands of photographs. There's no way in heaven that we can do that kind of individual restoration work on a photograph. We just do what we can to stop the damage from increasing. Okay. So for example, we've got tons of you think about the World War I images of the military units, the big, ginormous photographs, the long, thin ones. We've got so many of those that somebody rolled up. And so when you go to unroll them, they're creaking and they're cracking and they're causing problems. We do what we can to put those in a humidification chamber and then gently flatten them with blotters and things. But sometimes it's too risky to even do that. There are people out there that I can send you a document that we do keep that is referrals for preservation and conservation. And I'm happy to share that. We can't recommend any of those folks specifically, but it'll give you an idea of who does that kind of work. So yeah, if I've got a great image of my parents in Washington, D.C. when they were engaged going ring shopping. My dad's this was during World War II, my dad's in his Air Force uniform. It's the most fun image, but it's a mess. And I did take it to somebody who did what they could to try to restore it. And I'm not sorry that I did that. It didn't turn it into what I was hoping. We all kind of hope for these perfect, wonderful, clear images, and it didn't happen, but it's better. And I'm okay doing that. Would I do that with another image maybe that was more rare or something? Maybe not. Does that answer your question, or have I just danced all around it like a politician?
No, you did fine. Thank you.
Sure.
Sue, I had a question. I was wondering, do you know those people that take blogs? I've heard of this before. They take the photos off of the blog and they convert it to an album.
I have.
Okay.
I'm very, very interested in that. I've not looked into it yet, but I do know that they're out there. And I think, like with anything else, look for reviews, look for people who've actually done it and see, but I think that's a fantastic idea. And I will say, sort of on that line, not exactly the same, but on that line, my daughter takes photos. Obviously, I've got she and her husband and my granddaughter, who's 6 now, they live in Kuwait. They do a lot of traveling. She takes photos over the course of the year. Every year, she sits down and goes through all the photos that she's taken in that year, and she picks the best of them. And she goes to Shutterfly, because you can do it for next to nothing, and puts together a hardcover book with all those photos and text describing what they did and where they went, and this was fun, and we did this and we did that, and they do a beautiful layout. I think that's, if I had it to do, I wish they had that when my kids were little, because I think that's a fabulous idea.
But you don't know of a particular company that's doing it.
I wish I could recommend somebody, but I'm going to look into it, and I'm happy to share that with you. Angie, if you want to send me an email at the History Center, let me look into it and see what I can find out, and I'll let you know what I find. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Sure.
Just a comment. Now that you've said what you've said, I'm determined to go create 2 blogs, one for my family and one for my wife's family. Starting tomorrow, we're going to get to work on it.
I've had more fun with that. It started out actually to be a blog to vent about my master's thesis many years ago when I was working on my thesis.
Mhm.
But I just realized, that as I found stuff, as I had these really kind of cool family history discoveries, it was just so fun to be able to share that and explain how that came about. So years from now, after I'm gone, my kids can know how I found out about this, that, and the other, and how that played out. So yeah, do it. It's easy, it's cheap, it's free, it's so much fun.
Mhm.
Well, Sue, on behalf of the club, I'd like to thank you for your time this evening. And Hylos, thank you for digging up such a great presentation.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah,
It was
really
good.
worked out well.
I learned an awful lot. And I'm scared about what I've got, though. I have to
Don't
go
be
back and redo some things, I think.
She told you, eat that elephant one bite at a time.
There you go.
Yeah. Clean up my Lightroom catalog.
Oh,
I think we're all saying that.
yeah. And I will send Hylos a PDF of the presentation and the Word doc. But if any of you want to reach out to me directly, because the resources document does have, hyperlinks in it. And if you'd rather get that digitally, so you can just click on the hyperlinks, don't hesitate to email me at the History Center. I'm happy to do that.
Well, thanks. If
Thanks so
everyone could
much.
stick around just a couple minutes, I'd like to get the two Marks involved and Umid as well, with real quick updates. Mark Chandler, do you want to put a plug in for this week?
Wait a minute. Sue,
Am I good to go?
you're good to go. We thank you so much for this. We're going to do some dull, boring club stuff.
Oh,
I
I'm
know
sure,
where we're going.
I'm sure it's not dull or boring. Thank you all. I had a good time. Thanks.